The late afternoon sun dipped low over the Wyoming territory, casting the vast stretch of sagebrush and rock in hues of amber and rust. A parched wind traversed the desolate landscape, bearing the flavor of dust and the foretelling of another blazing day ahead. Far off, the Laramie Mountains stood like ancient guardians, their summits veiled in a mist that obscured the boundary between land and sky. Soren Thornwatch nudged his bay stallion ahead, his calloused hands firm on the reins despite the exhaustion that bore down on him. At 42, he presented a formidable presence against the rugged backdrop of the frontier, standing tall and broad-shouldered, with silver prematurely streaking his dark hair and deep creases carved around eyes as cold as winter ice. His quality wool coat and finely crafted boots signaled his affluence. Yet there was an air about him that hinted at burdens endured for too long, of a spirit that had forgotten the art of repose. The Thornwatch Ranch extended across 20,000 acres of prime grazing land, securing Soren's status as one of the wealthiest individuals in the territory. His cattle herds numbered in the thousands, his horses were the most prized bloodstock west of the Mississippi, and his bank accounts in Cheyenne could have afforded him a life of comfort in any eastern city. Yet here he rode, as solitary as ever, returning from another unproductive meeting with the railroad representatives, who seemed intent on driving their iron rails through the core of his property. The wind changed direction, and Soren's mount snorted uneasily, ears perking forward. Years of surviving on the frontier had taught him to heed his horse's instincts. He reined in, surveying the barren landscape with practiced eyes. Nothing stirred except for a solitary hawk soaring overhead, and tumbleweeds scuttling across the hardened earth. Then he caught it, a sound so faint it could have been a trick of his mind. A low, desperate wail carried on the wind. Soren's hand automatically went to the Colt .45 at his side. Out here, miles from the nearest settlement, such noises seldom boded well. Bandits, claim jumpers, and worse lurked in these isolated stretches, preying on the unsuspecting. Yet something in that pitiful cry stirred a memory he had tried to suppress. Another voice, long silenced, pleading for aid that never arrived. He directed his horse toward a dilapidated shack partially concealed behind a group of cottonwoods, one of the many forsaken homesteads that speckled the territory like decayed teeth. The shack's roof had partially caved in, and its door hung askew on rusted hinges. It was the kind of place respectable folks steered clear of, a refuge for vagabonds and outlaws. The sound echoed again, more distinct now, a muffled cry of anguish. Soren dismounted, drawing his pistol in one fluid motion. His spurs jingled softly as he approached the doorway, every sense on high alert. The inside was dim, illuminated only by slivers of dusty light seeping through the cracks in the walls. The stench hit him first. Sweat, fear, and something else that caused his jaw to tighten. In the shadows, almost invisible, a form lay crumpled. As his vision adapted, the grim details became horrifyingly clear. A young woman, around 20, was tied up, her wrists bound with coarse rope that had chafed her skin. A dirty piece of sackcloth muffled her mouth, the tightness of the knot leaving red marks on her cheeks. Her once innocent blue dress was tattered and smeared with dirt, and what appeared to be dried blood. Her dark hair was a mess around her face, and her eyes, wide with fear and brimming with tears, stared at him with a blend of hope and terror. Soren secured his gun and knelt beside her, his hands swiftly working on the knots. The girl recoiled at his touch, a muffled cry escaping from behind the gag. "Take it easy," he murmured, his voice harsher than he meant it to be from lack of use. "I won't harm you." The rope around her wrist came loose first, and she frantically tried to remove the cloth from her mouth. Soren gently held her hands, noticing how they shook like leaves in the wind. "Allow me," he said, reaching for the knot at the back of her head. The fabric was soaked with saliva and tears, making the knot tight and difficult to untie. When it finally loosened, he carefully pulled the gag away. The girl took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she gulped in air. Her lips were split and bleeding, her throat convulsing. When she finally spoke, her voice was a faint, broken whisper that seemed to resonate through the empty space and into his heart. "I can't breathe." Soren felt something inside him shatter, a crack in the barrier he had built around his heart. Those 3 words, spoken with such desperate relief, took him back to another time, another place, a burning cabin, smoke-filled rooms, and voices screaming that he was too late. He pushed the memory away and focused on the rope around her ankles, his movements precise but swift. The girl, for she was barely more than a child despite her ordeal, watched him with eyes that seemed to study his every move, as if trying to decide whether he was a rescuer or just another threat. "Can you sit up?" he asked when she was free. She nodded, struggling to push herself upright. Soren supported her with a hand on her shoulder, feeling her tremble beneath his touch. In the better light, he could see the full extent of her condition. Dehydration had left her lips cracked and her skin pale, and bruises in various stages of healing covered her arms. "Water," she rasped. Soren took his canteen from his saddlebag and held it to her lips, warning her to drink slowly despite her obvious thirst. She complied, taking small sips while keeping her eyes fixed on his face. "How long have you been here?" he asked. 2 days, maybe 3. "I lost track," she whispered, each word an effort. "Who did this to you?" Fear flickered across her face, and she pressed herself against the wall. "They'll come back. They always return." Soren's face tightened with resolve. "Not on my watch. They won't." She gave a slight nod, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. He assisted her to stand, observing how she wobbled slightly. Without seeking her consent, he lifted her into his arms. She was as light as a feather, barely there. "I'm Soren Thornwatch," he introduced as he carried her towards his horse. "I run the Triple T Ranch, roughly 10 miles north from here. You'll find safety there." "Safe?" she echoed, as if trying out a strange new word. "I can't repay you. I possess nothing. I'm not seeking payment." He positioned her in the saddle and mounted behind her, wrapping one arm around her waist to keep her steady. She stiffened at his touch, but didn't withdraw. As they rode into the dimming light, Soren became intensely aware of her, the way she slowly leaned against his chest, the soft rhythm of her breath, the faith she was placing in a stranger. The Triple T emerged from the encroaching darkness like a miniature town, with barns, corrals, bunkhouses, and a smithy, all overshadowed by the main house with its wraparound porch and windows glowing softly in the twilight. Cowboys paused from their evening tasks, their faces showing clear curiosity as their usually solitary boss arrived with a woman in his arms. "Joran," Soren called to his foreman, "send someone for Doc Draven. Make it urgent." "Yes, sir." "Mr. Thornwatch." If Joran was taken aback by the request, his rugged face didn't reveal it. The ranch hands had long since learned not to question their employer's infrequent deviations from routine. Soren carried the girl into the house, past the surprised housekeeper, Mrs. Chinler, and up the stairs to a guest room that had gathered dust for years. He placed her gently on the bed, stepping back as Mrs. Chinler entered, with her usual brisk efficiency. "Poor dear," the older woman murmured, assessing the girl's condition with a keen eye. "I'll prepare a bath and find some clean clothes. You can go now, Mr. Thornwatch. This is women's work." Soren paused at the door, struck by how tiny and fragile the girl appeared against the crisp white sheets. She was watching him with those deep eyes, an unreadable expression within them. "Thank you," she whispered. He gave a brief nod and left, but her words lingered with him as he poured himself a whiskey in his study. Soren attempted to dismiss the unfamiliar sensation in his chest, a feeling he'd believed buried with his wife and daughter 5 years past. He'd saved the girl out of simple human kindness, nothing more. By morning, he'd ensure she reached town safely, and that would be that. Yet as night fell over the ranch, and he found himself listening for sounds from upstairs, Soren Thornwatch had the disquieting sense that his meticulously ordered world had just shifted off its axis. The echo of her words, "I can't breathe," resonated in his mind, stirring something he'd thought long dead. The wind intensified outside, shaking the windows and bringing with it the smell of impending rain. The Triple T Ranch was on the brink of change, ready or not. The morning sun peeked through the lace curtains, casting intricate designs on the guest room floor. The girl woke up, briefly confused by the softness of the bed and the fresh scent of lavender soap on her skin. For a moment she questioned if the rescue had been a dream, but the pain in her wrists and the fine cotton nightgown she wore confirmed it was real. A soft knock broke her train of thought. Mrs. Kindler entered, carrying a breakfast tray, her round face etched with worry. "Good morning, dear. How are you feeling?" she asked. "Better, thank you," the girl replied, her voice steady and stronger than the night before. "None of that thank you nonsense. I'm Mrs. Kindler, and you're going to eat every bite of this breakfast. You're far too thin." As the girl ate the porridge, Mrs. Kindler bustled around, laying out a simple brown dress and undergarments. "Mr. Thornwatch asked if you'd join him in his study when you're ready. No rush. He's got nowhere urgent to be for once." After Mrs. Kindler left, the girl dressed slowly, her fingers shaking slightly as she fastened the buttons. The dress fit well enough, though it hung loosely on her slender frame. She caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror and barely recognized the reflection. Her hair was clean and braided neatly, and her bruises were fading to yellow and green. She looked almost presentable, though fears still lingered in her dark eyes. The house was more magnificent than anything she had ever seen, with gleaming wood floors and oil paintings adorning the hallways. She found the study by following the aroma of coffee and tobacco, pausing at the doorway to gather her courage. Soren stood by the window, his silhouette framed by the morning light. He had swapped his fine coat from the previous day for work clothes, denim pants, and a blue flannel shirt that accentuated his broad shoulders. When he turned, she was struck again by his eyes, ice blue but not cold, carrying a depth of sorrow that mirrored her own. "Please have a seat," he said, gesturing to a leather chair by the fireplace. "How are you feeling?" "Much better, Mr. Thornwatch." "I'm grateful for your kindness." "Soren," he corrected. "May I inquire about your name?" She hesitated, her fingers fidgeting in her lap. "Alarian. Alarian McKenderson." "Well, Miss McKenderson, Doc Draven says you'll make a full recovery with rest and proper meals. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. I couldn't impose. It's no imposition," he said firmly. "Now I need to ask about the men who did this to you. They could be a danger to my ranch." Hilarian's composure faltered. "They'll come looking. They always find what they're hunting." "Who are they?" The Carillon gang. Torian Carillon and his men operate out of Laramie. She swallowed hard. They seized young women traveling solo, enticing them with promises of employment as seamstresses or shop assistants. By the time we understood the reality, we were too distant from home, too deeply indebted to them for travel costs. Those who attempted to flee. She gently traced the faint rope marks still visible on her wrist. Soren's face clouded over. He had heard rumors of such schemes, but had brushed them off as mere frontier folklore. You were attempting to break free. I was on my way to my aunt in California. My parents succumbed to fever last winter, and I sold all our belongings to afford the train fare. I was transferring trains in Laramie when a well-dressed woman approached me about a job at a dress shop. She appeared so kind, so eager to help. Tears streamed down her face. I was naive. You were vulnerable and alone. That doesn't make you naive. Ilarion looked up, taken aback by the empathy in his voice. I managed to slip away 3 nights ago while they were drinking. I made it as far as that old shack before they caught up with me. They left me there to contemplate my decisions, claiming I'd be begging to return after a few days without water. The sound of horses in the yard caught Soren's attention, drawing him to the window. Below, cowboys were preparing for the day's work, their voices carrying on the crisp morning air. This was his territory, his meticulously controlled world, where nothing occurred without his approval. "You're safe under my protection now," he murmured. "The Carillon gang won't dare harm you here. You don't know them. They have influence, lawmen in their pockets, and I have 20 armed cowboys, the finest lawyer in Wyoming, and enough wealth to buy my own justice if necessary." He turned away from the window. "Though I prefer addressing problems more directly." There was an edge to his voice that made her shiver, but it wasn't from fear. Beneath his polished exterior lay a steely resolve, a toughness honed by survival in a harsh land. A disturbance outside interrupted their conversation. Joran burst into the room without knocking, his weathered face grave. "Boss, we've got company." 3 riders are approaching from the north road, inquiring about a runaway girl. Soren's hand instinctively moved toward where his gun belt usually hung. "How far out?" "About 10 minutes. Should I turn them away?" "No. Have the men go about their usual tasks, but keep their rifles within reach. I'll greet our visitors at the main gate." He glanced at Ilarion, who had paled. "Joran, escort Miss McKenderson to the root cellar. Bar the door and don't open it until I give the word." "I won't hide," Ilarion declared, standing abruptly. "I'm tired of running, tired of being afraid. This isn't open for discussion." Soren's voice held the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Joran." The foreman gently but firmly guided Ilarion from the room. Soren fastened his gun belt, checking the loads in his Colt before stepping outside. The morning had darkened, clouds rolling in from the mountains, hinting at an early autumn storm. He took his position at the ranch's main entrance, thumbs casually hooked in his belt, but ready to draw. Behind him he felt, rather than saw, his men positioning themselves strategically in the barn loft, hiding behind water troughs along the bunkhouse wall. The Triple T always protected its own. 3 riders emerged from the swirling dust, hard-looking men with faces branded by a life outside the law. The leader, a thick-set man with greasy black hair and a scar cutting across his left cheek, reined in just outside the gate. "Good morning, friend," the man said, revealing yellowed teeth in what might have been a smile. "I'm Cadric Harthorn. We're searching for some stolen property that might have passed through here." This is private land, Soren replied calmly. There's no stolen property here. Well, you haven't even heard what we're looking for. A young woman, about 20, with dark hair, troubled in the mind. Poor thing. She ran away from her family, and they're extremely worried. I haven't seen anyone matching that description. Hawthorne's eyes narrowed. Do you mind if we look around? Wouldn't want you unknowingly harboring a fugitive. I do mind. As I said, this is private property. One of the other riders, younger and clearly eager for trouble, spoke up. You know who you're talking to, old man. Mr. Carillon doesn't like being told no. Then Mr. Carillon and I have something in common. Soren said, I don't appreciate uninvited guests. The tension grew taut as a wire. Hawthorne's hand drifted toward his sidearm, but something in Soren's stance in the quiet ranch yard made him pause. This isn't over, Hawthorne said finally. Mr. Carillon has legal papers on that girl, debt bonds. If you interfere with the lawful recovery of property, you'll answer to the territorial judge. I look forward to it. Now get off my land. The three men wheeled their horses around and galloped away, dust clouds marking their retreat. Soren waited until they were mere specks on the horizon before relaxing his stance. Joran, he called, escort Miss McKenderson back to the house and send a rider to town. I want Hymir Ravenshaw out here before nightfall. As the ranch returned to its normal rhythm, Soren found himself troubled by more than just the threat of the Carillon gang. The fear in Ilarion McKenderson's eyes, the desperation in her voice when she'd spoken of freedom, it stirred memories he'd tried to bury with whiskey and hard work. That evening, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder rolled across the plains, Ilarion joined him for dinner. She'd regained some color, though she flinched at every crack of lightning. They ate in comfortable silence until she finally spoke. Why are you helping me? You don't know me. I could be lying about everything. Soren set down his fork. 5 years ago, my wife and daughter were traveling to Denver to visit Sariel's sister. Their stagecoach was robbed. The bandits? He paused. The words were still difficult. They didn't have to kill them. Sariel had already given them her jewelry, her money, but they did anyway. I'm sorry, Ilarion whispered. I was absent, unable to shield them. I couldn't even track down the culprits. 2 years I devoted to the search, our gazes locked. I failed to rescue them. Yet I can assist you now. The downpour grew fiercer, pounding the roof as if 1,000 hands were tapping. In the dancing light of the lamp, Ilarion appeared incredibly youthful and delicate. Still, there was a resilience within her, born of adversity and desperation. I won't impose any trouble on you, she vowed. At dawn, I'll depart. You'll do no such thing, he countered. His tone was resolute, yet gentle. You're remaining here until this issue with Carillon is settled. After that, we'll reassess. As the tempest raged on, neither acknowledged the subtle shift beginning to unfold, the gradual melting of two hearts, long frozen. The fragile bond forming between two souls scarred by loss. The Triple T Ranch had witnessed its share of turmoil over the years, but never anything like the silent upheaval occurring in its dining room, where a hardened rancher and a desperate young woman discovered they shared more than just a meal. The town of Cedar Ridge stretched along the Laram River's banks, a mix of orderly commerce and lawless frontier. One end of Main Street featured a general store, bank, and church, while the other faded into saloons, gambling dens, and dubious establishments. It was a Saturday afternoon when Soren arrived. and the weekly cattle auction had attracted ranchers and buyers from all around. He secured his horse outside Morrison's dry goods, planning to gather supplies and assess the town's atmosphere. 3 weeks had passed since Alarion's arrival at the Triple T, and though the Carillon gang hadn't reappeared, Soren knew they were plotting something. Men like them didn't forget debts, whether genuine or fabricated. "Afternoon, Mr. Thornwatch," Osric Draven called out from behind the counter. The shopkeeper's usual warmth seemed forced. "Haven't seen you in town lately." "Been occupied with the ranch," Soren replied, handing over his list. "The usual order, Osric." Draven began collecting the items, but Soren noticed his glances toward the window. "Heard you have a visitor out at your place," Draven mentioned. "News spreads quickly." "Indeed it does," Soren agreed. Draven leaned in, lowering his voice. "Torian Carillon's been talking about it. Claims you're sheltering a thief who owes him $300. "Since when does Carillon engage in anything legitimate enough to create legal debt?" Soren asked. "Since Judge Stonecrest started accepting his bribes." Draven looked around nervously. "Carillon has documents. Soren, legal papers stating that girl signed a work contract. Says she took advanced wages and fled." Soren's expression darkened. He'd suspected Carillon had influence, but a territorial judge in his pocket changed the game. Forged documents, undoubtedly. "Perhaps, but Stonecrest won't view it that way," Draven warned. He finished packing the supplies. "You have allies in this town, Soren. But Carillon wields fear. Folks still talk about the trouble the Gallowmere family faced when they defied him. The Gallowmere family had a modest farm east of town until they declined to sell to one of Carillon's business partners. Their barn was reduced to ashes. Their livestock fell ill, and ultimately they abandoned the area completely. The sheriff looked into it, but no evidence was ever uncovered. Soren settled his bill and stepped back out into the bright afternoon sunlight. Across the way, the Silver Dollar Saloon was bustling with activity. Through the swinging doors, he spotted cowboys and townsfolk gathered at the bar, and in a corner, Torian Carillon himself holding court. Carillon was a large man who had let himself go, with thinning red hair and the ruddy complexion of someone who drank heavily. His expensive suit couldn't conceal the cruelty in his small eyes or the harsh lines of his mouth. He was accompanied by 2 of his enforcers, including the scarred Hawthorne who had visited the ranch. Soren strode across the street with purpose, pushing through the saloon doors. The chatter in the room faded as the patrons recognized him. Carillon glanced up from his cards, a smirk spreading across his fleshy face. "Well, well, look who decided to join us lowly folks." Carillon's voice dripped with insincere friendliness. "Boys, make some space for the gentleman." "I'll stand," Soren replied. "This won't take much time. Straight to the point. I appreciate that." Carillon put down his cards. "I suppose you're here about my property. Miss McKenderson is not property." According to Judge Stonecrest, she signed a contract for domestic work, took a $300 advance on her wages, and then fled. Carillon pulled out a folded document from his vest. "Everything is legal and above board." Soren didn't bother glancing at the papers. "We both know what your domestic service really involves." "Be careful, Thornwatch." "That sounds like defamation." Carillon's smile didn't falter. "I operate legitimate businesses. Just because a girl changes her mind about honest work doesn't make me a criminal. And the rope burns on her wrists, the bruises. Sometimes troubled girls need to be restrained for their own safety." Doc Draven can confirm she was prone to outbursts when she first arrived in town. Isn't that right, Doc? Soren turned to see Dr. Draven at the bar. The elderly doctor was staring intently at his whiskey. After a long pause, the doctor muttered, "The girl did seem distressed when I first examined her." The betrayal hurt, but Soren couldn't fault the old man. Carillon had his ways of ensuring compliance. "Here's my proposal," Carillon went on. "Bring the girl back, and we'll consider the matter settled. Keep her, and I'll have the sheriff arrest you for aiding a fugitive. Your call." "And here's my counter-proposal," Soren said softly. "Leave Wyoming territory tonight. Don't return." Hawthorne started to rise from his chair, his hand moving toward his gun. "Are you threatening Mr. Carillon? I'm offering advice." Soren's hand rested casually near his own weapon. "The same advice I'd give any man who deals in human suffering." The saloon fell silent. Carillon's cheeks burned a deeper shade, but he motioned for Hawthorne to take a seat. "You've got nerve, Thornwatch, but nerve won't shield you from the law. Sheriff Darien will be dropping by to see you shortly. I'll make sure the coffee is hot." Soren pivoted and exited, sensing the chill of unfriendly gazes on his back. Outside, he observed how swiftly people looked away, how conversations halted as he approached. Carillon's sway was infecting Cedar Ridge like a plague. At the newspaper's office, he encountered William Valmere, arranging type for the upcoming issue. The editor glanced up, visibly relieved. "Soren, praise Alderaan. I was hoping you'd stop by. What's the latest, Kedrick?" Valmere's eyes darted toward the door, then he signaled Soren to follow him to the rear room. "Carillon has been circulating his account of events. He claims the McKenderson girl is a fraud who preys on affluent men. Some are believing it, and the rest are too frightened to contradict him. Carillon has Judge Stonecrest arriving next week for the autumn court session. Rumor has it he'll issue a warrant then." Soren processed this news. A warrant from a territorial judge would bring in marshals, meaning he couldn't just ignore the situation. "There's more." Valmere went on. "I've been investigating Carlisle's operations. I have a contact in Laram who says at least a dozen girls have vanished through his agency over the past 2 years. Most end up in mining towns or military outposts, if you catch my drift. Can you publish it?" "Not without concrete evidence, and my informant is too terrified to go public." Valmere rubbed his face, exhaustion evident. "Carillon has this town in a chokehold. Soren, even Sheriff Darien, is under his thumb now." Soren had suspected as much. John Darien was a weak man who had won the election by vowing not to disrupt the town's lucrative vices. What about Hymir Ravenshaw? Federal law only applies if Carlisle operates across state lines, as long as he keeps his business within Wyoming territory. Ravenshaw can't touch him without proof of federal crimes. Soren departed the newspaper office with a heavy heart. The law, which should have safeguarded the innocent, had been manipulated to serve the corrupt. As he prepared his supplies, he spotted Alarian's reflection in the store window across the street. She was standing on the boardwalk outside the milliner's shop, dressed in one of Sariel's old gowns and a borrowed bonnet. His initial reaction was anger. He had told her to stay at the ranch, but as he watched her, admiring the displayed hats with a longing gaze, something else stirred within him. She appeared like any young woman enjoying a day in town, not the terrified creature he had found 3 weeks prior. Mrs. Kindler exited the shop, arms laden with packages. The two women conversed casually as they headed toward the buggy Soren now noticed parked nearby. Joran sat in the driver's seat, rifle resting across his lap, eyes constantly scanning the street. Mr. Thornwatch. He spotted Mariseth Silvershade, the banker's wife, striding towards him with purpose. She was among the rare women in town who didn't bow to their husbands' business dealings. Mrs. Silvershade, I wanted to inform you, she murmured, that not everyone is swayed by Carillon's fabrications. That unfortunate girl's truth is evident in her eyes for those with the wit to see it. I'm grateful for your support, ma'am, he replied. The Ladies' Temperance Society has been tracking the vanishings. We lack concrete evidence, but we're aware of the truth. She handed him a folded note. Names and dates. Perhaps it will be useful. As she hurried off, he unfolded the paper. 12 names were meticulously listed, each with a date and a brief account. Muriel Patterson, 19, arrived from Ohio in June 1879, vanished in July 1879. Aurelia Millwright, 22, arrived from Missouri in September 1879, disappeared in October 1879. The list continued. A grim record of shattered lives. He carefully tucked the paper into his vest pocket. It might not hold up in court, but it was a different kind of weapon. He was about to depart when a disturbance near the saloon caught his attention. Hawthorne and another of Carillon's men had trapped Joran and the women beside their buggy. Alarion stood motionless as Hawthorne sneered at her. Well, well, look what we have here. The fugitive herself, as pretty as ever. He swiftly closed the distance between them. Trouble here, Joran? He asked. No, sir, the foreman responded calmly. These gentlemen were just leaving. Don't think so, Hawthorne retorted. Mr. Carillon wants a word with his property. The lady is under my protection, he declared, his voice echoing through the street. Lay a hand on her, and you'll answer to me. Big words for one man, Hawthorne scoffed. He's not alone, a voice called out. He glanced back to see Hrothgar McAlderson, owner of the Double Bar Ranch, stepping out of the bank. The ladies are with Thornwatch, making her untouchable, McAlderson stated. Other ranchers began emerging from shops and saloons, forming a loose semicircle. Not all were his allies, but they respected the frontier's code. When a man offered his protection, it meant something. Hawthorne backed away, spitting into the dust. This isn't over, he growled as he retreated. As Hawthorne left, Alarion looked up at him, her eyes glistening with tears. I'm sorry, she whispered. I just wanted to see the town. I didn't mean to cause trouble. You have no reason to apologize, he assured her firmly. You're not a captive at the Triple T. The journey back to the ranch was quiet. Alarion sat in the buggy with Mrs. Chinler while he rode alongside, vigilant for any signs of pursuit. The altercation in town had made one thing clear. Carillon wouldn't relent, and the law was in his pocket. That evening, as dusk painted the range in purple hues, he stood on his porch, grappling with the choice before him. He could send Alarion away, perhaps to California, as she had initially planned. It would be the prudent choice, the safe choice. When she stepped onto the porch, her shawl shielding her from the evening's cold, he realized he had already chosen his path. Certain battles were worth fighting, even when the chances of winning were slim. They won't cease, Alarion murmured. Carillon's men. They'll keep pressing until we're prepared to face them. She examined his features in the dwindling light. Why does my destiny hold such significance for you? Soren fell silent for a moment, attuned to the distant calls of cattle and the rustling of grass in the wind. Some causes are worth defending, even when taking a stand is perilous. My Serial grasped that. It's high time I recalled it as well. As the night sky began to sparkle with stars, they stood side by side in comfortable silence, two hearts bracing for the impending storm. The autumn wind wailed across the plains, a mournful sound that drove dust against the Triple T Ranch buildings. It had been 2 days since the altercation in town, and an unsettling calm had descended over the land, the kind that often preceded violence on the frontier. Soren was in his study, meticulously cleaning his Winchester rifle. Through the window, he could see his men stationed around the compound. Joran had increased the night watch, and no one ventured out alone anymore. The ranch had shifted from a bustling cattle operation to a fortified stronghold. A knock broke his concentration. Alarian entered bearing a tray with coffee and sandwiches. She had started assisting Mrs. Chinler with household tasks, insisting on earning her keep despite Soren's objections. "You skipped dinner," she said, placing the tray on his desk. "Mrs. Chinler is concerned you're not eating enough." "Mrs. Chinler worries excessively," he replied, accepting the coffee with gratitude, observing how Alarian's hands no longer shook as she poured. "The men are on edge," she whispered. "Some are considering leaving." "I can't blame them. This isn't their battle, but they're staying for now." Soren put down the rifle. "Alarian, I need you to think about this. I'm not leaving." Her voice was resolute, a strength he hadn't heard before. "I've spent months fleeing, hiding, living in fear. I won't do it anymore. This could turn out badly. It already has for too many girls." She pulled out the list Mariseth Silvershade had given him. "I knew Muriel Patterson. We traveled on the same train from Ohio. She was destined to be a schoolteacher." Her voice wavered. 16 years old, with aspirations of educating frontier children. Now she's out there, if she's even alive. Soren looked at her in the lamplight. The terrified girl he had rescued was still present, but now there was an undercurrent of resolve. "You're not accountable for what happened to them." "No, but I survived when they didn't." "That has to count for something." Their discussion was cut short by the sound of approaching horses, many of them riding fast. Soren seized his rifle and moved towards the door. Alarian followed closely, ignoring his gesture for her to stay back. Joran encountered them on the porch, around 15, possibly 20 riders approaching from the southern road. Soren's instincts kicked in, sensing trouble. Carillon had initiated his plan. He ordered his men to take up defensive positions. Anyone wishing to leave could do so without repercussions and with a full month's pay. Joran offered a tense smile. "We're all staying, boss," he had already confirmed. The riders emerged from the dust storm like ghosts, forming a semicircle before the ranch gate. Torian Carillon sat at their center, his substantial frame causing his horse to strain. Flanking him was a gaunt man in a black suit. Soren assumed it was Judge Stonecrest. Sheriff Darien was also present, appearing uneasy but resolute. "Thornwatch." Carillon's voice echoed across the yard. "I've come to reclaim my property. This time, it's all legal and proper." Soren advanced, rifle held casually but ready. His men stayed hidden but alert, shadows in windows, silhouettes in doorways. "State your business and depart," he commanded. Judge Stonecrest urged his horse forward. "Mr. Thornwatch, I am Judge Cornelius Stonecrest of the Territorial Court. I possess a warrant for the return of Alarian McHenderson, who is legally contracted to Mr. Carillon." "Show me this warrant," Soren demanded. The judge presented a document which Joran retrieved and brought to Soren, even in the dimming light. Soren could see it was official, sealed and signed by the appropriate authorities. "This warrant is based on false claims," Soren asserted. "Miss McHenderson signed nothing willingly. That's for the court to determine." Stonecrest replied smoothly. For now, the law mandates her return. Refuse, and you'll face obstruction of justice charges. And if you request a proper hearing, the hearing was conducted in absentia. Miss McHenderson failed to appear to contest the charges. Stonecrest's smile was thin and smug. The law has been followed precisely. Hilarion stepped out onto the porch, despite Soren's attempt to restrain her. I'll testify now. I'll reveal the truth. You'll remain silent, Ishar snapped. A contract breaker and thief has no right to speak. She's no thief, Soren said, his voice dangerous. The court has ruled otherwise, Stonecrest retorted. He gestured to Sheriff Darien. Sheriff, fulfill your duty. Darien shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Now, Soren, let's not complicate this more than necessary. Just send the girl out, and we'll leave. The only way she leaves is over my lifeless body, Soren declared. That can be arranged, Hawthorne called out, his hand hovering near his pistol. The tension was palpable. 24 men poised on the brink of violence. The wind gusted, sending dust devils spinning between the opposing forces. Soren could feel his men's readiness, fingers on triggers, awaiting his command. Then Hilarion did something unexpected. She descended the porch steps, head held high, moving toward Carillon's group. Hilarion. No, Soren started after her, but she raised a hand. I won't have bloodshed over me, she said clearly. I'll go. Like hell you will, Soren grabbed her arm. Get back in the house. She looked at him, and he noticed tears cascading down her cheeks. You have a life here, a ranch, and men who rely on you? I won't allow Carillon to ruin that. Some things are worth standing up for, and some battles can't be won with force. She carefully pulled away from his hold. Believe in me. There was something in her eyes that made him pause. She marched toward Carillon's group, but as she passed Jorin, she faltered a bit. The foreman steadied her, and in that brief moment Soren saw her slip something into his hand. Clever girl, Carillon sneered as she neared. Hawthorne? Tie her up. We don't want her escaping again. As Hawthorne dismounted with a rope, Hilarion spoke up. I'll come quietly, but I have terms. You're not in a position to negotiate, Stonecrest retorted. I have details about your activities that certain individuals would find quite fascinating. Hilarion's voice echoed in the evening air. Names, dates, locations. Call it insurance. With each name she mentioned, Carillon's expression darkened. Should I go on, or would you prefer a private discussion? Bring her, Carillon instructed Hawthorne. We'll resolve this back in town. No, Hilarion insisted. We settle this right here, right now. Full payment of my alleged debt, plus a written release from all claims in exchange for my silence about what I know. You think I'm trying to blackmail you? Carillon's voice was menacing. I think you're a businessman who understands gains and losses. Hilarion stood tall, despite the fear Soren could see in her stiff stance. My silence is worth more than $300. Carillon studied her for a long moment, then laughed, a harsh sound. You've got guts, girl. More than most. He nodded to Stonecrest. Draft a release. We'll consider this debt settled. Torian, you can't be serious, Hawthorne protested. Shut up, Carillon ordered, his eyes never leaving Hilarion. But listen, girl. You ever talk about my business, ever cause me trouble, and I'll track you down. There's no place in this territory you can hide. While Stonecrest prepared the document, Soren struggled with the urge to act. Every instinct urged him to protect Hilarion, to drive these men off his land with force, but she had asked him to trust her. And despite his efforts, the release was signed and witnessed. Sheriff Darien looked relieved that violence had been avoided. Alarian took the document with steady hands, though Soren noticed how pale her knuckles were as she held it. "We're finished here," Carillon declared. "But Thornwatch, you better stay out of my affairs from now on. Next time, that girl won't be around to save you." The riders turned and left, vanishing into the gathering darkness. Alarian stood alone in the yard until they were gone. Then her legs gave way. Soren caught her before she fell, lifting her into his arms. "What did you give Joran?" he asked as he carried her inside. She forced a faint smile. "I've prepared a list naming Mariseth Silvershade, and a letter I penned last night outlining everything I experienced while in Carillon's custody. Joran is aware that he must deliver it to Hymir Ravenshaw if I meet an untimely end. That was a perilous move. Individuals like Carillon grasped the concept of leverage. I had to ensure my freedom was more valuable than my captivity." She trembled slightly. "But I've never been so terrified." Soren guided her to the parlor sofa. Mrs. Kindler bustled about, wrapping her in blankets and offering tea. As the adrenaline subsided, he couldn't help but feel both awestruck and unsettled by Alarian's bravery. She had confronted one of the most formidable men in the territory, armed with nothing but her intellect and sharp tongue. "This isn't finished," he murmured. "Carillon won't let this go easily." "True, but he'll hesitate before acting against us openly again." Alarian took the tea with gratitude. "I've bought us some time. That's all." "Time for what?" "To gather the concrete evidence to reveal his true deeds." Her gaze locked with his. "Those girls deserve justice. Soren and men like Carillon only comprehend one form of justice in the end." Soren knew she was correct. They had won this skirmish through strategy and deception. But the larger conflict was far from resolved. Carillon would regroup, devise new tactics to attack them. And when he did, mere words wouldn't suffice. Joran stepped into the doorway. "Boss, there are visitors coming, but it's Hymir Ravenshaw and 2 deputies. A glimmer of hope stirred in Soren's chest. Perhaps their message had already reached the federal lawmen. He went out to greet them, leaving Alarian in Mrs. Kindler's reliable care. Ravenshaw was a tall, rugged man with keen eyes and a reputation for integrity. He dismounted wearily, accepting Soren's offer of coffee. "I received an intriguing letter from your foreman," Ravenshaw said, "along with a list that matches some missing persons reports I've been compiling. Mind if we talk?" For the first time in days, Soren sensed the tide might be shifting. He glanced back at the house, where lamplight glowed softly in the windows, signaling Alarian's safety for the moment. "Come in, Hymir. We have much to discuss." As they entered the house, the wind began to abate, and stars emerged through the dispersing clouds. The storm had passed for now, but Soren knew this was merely the calm before the next storm, and when it came, they'd need to be prepared with more than just bravery and clever words. The Laram Mountains stood dark against the star-studded sky as Soren and Alarian ventured deeper into the wilderness. Behind them, the Triple T Ranch had faded into the pre-dawn darkness, and ahead lay only uncertain, rocky paths, dense pine forests, and the hope of temporary refuge. They had departed quietly 3 hours before sunrise after Joran had brought news of Carillon's men assembling in town. Hymir Ravenshaw was building a case, but it would take time they lacked. Carillon's public annulment of Alarian's debt had been a deep humiliation, and such men did not forgive easily. "There's a line shack about 10 miles up," Soren called over his shoulder. We'd let the horses rest there. Alarion gave a nod, gripping the saddle horn of the calm mare that Soren had selected for her. She wasn't particularly skilled at riding, but necessity had a way of accelerating learning. Her modest bag of possessions, meager as it was secured behind her saddle. The path became steeper, snaking between colossal rocks and clusters of aspen that murmured tales in the breeze. Soren guided them with the assurance of someone intimately familiar with every hidden trail and stream crossing. This was his territory, untamed and harsh, yet straightforward in its perils. As the sun bathed the mountaintops in hues of gold and crimson, they arrived at the Line Shack, a robust log building nestled in a sheltered grove. Soren had utilized it during cattle roundups when livestock wandered into the highlands. Now it would serve as their sanctuary. "Head inside and get some rest," Soren instructed Alarion, as he began to unsaddle the horses. But she lingered to assist. Her actions were precise despite her evident weariness. They labored side by side in comfortable silence, the mundane chores a welcome respite after days of strain. Once the horses were settled with water and the grain Soren had brought, they entered the cabin together. It was modest but tidy. A single room featuring a stone hearth, a rustic wooden table, and 2 narrow cots. Soren had stocked it with provisions each spring, a practice that now proved advantageous. As he kindled a fire, Alarion unpacked the food that Chandler had hastily prepared. "She wanted to join us," Alarion murmured. "I had to persuade her that we'd be all right. You were right. This isn't a journey for her." Soren added more kindling to the blossoming flames. "I wonder if it's a journey for you either. I'm tougher than I appear. I'm starting to realize that." They enjoyed a modest breakfast of biscuits and dried beef, the fire crackling warmly as the mountain chill seeped through the windows. Outside, a hawk soared lazily, and the wind whistled through the pines. The tranquility was misleading. "How long can we remain here?" Alarion inquired. "A few days, perhaps a week. Joran will send word when it's safe to return." Soren observed her from across the table. "Or we could continue riding. Denver is 3 days north. You could board a train to California. Begin anew. Do you want me to leave?" The question lingered between them like a morning fog. Soren found himself unable to meet her gaze. "I want you to be safe. Everything else." He trailed off, uncertain how to express the emotions that had been growing despite his attempts to repress them. "I don't want to run anymore," Alarion declared resolutely. "Carillon took my parents' money, my dignity, my freedom. I won't let him take anything else." "He could take your life. Then at least I'll die on my feet." She stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the wilderness. "My father was a minister. Did I mention that? He used to say that evil prevails when good people stand idle. I stood idle while those other girls vanished. Not anymore." Soren stood beside her at the window, near enough to detect the faint aroma of lavender in her hair. "You're not accountable for Carillon's transgressions?" "No, but I am accountable for how I used my liberty." She pivoted to confront him, and abruptly, the space between them felt incredibly narrow. "You restored that to me, Soren? You defied armed men for a stranger? Why?" He fell silent for a moment, grappling with truths he had long suppressed. "Because I've spent 5 years existing in a void, merely going through the motions of life, without feeling anything. Then I encountered you in that hut. I heard you gasp that you couldn't breathe, and something within me stirred." His voice grew hoarse. Perhaps I rescued you, but you rescued me as well. Alarion's eyes shimmered with held-back tears. Without hesitation, she reached up to caress his face, her fingers softly tracing the stubble on his jaw. Sariel was fortunate to have been loved by you. I wasn't present when she needed me. You can't shield everyone from every peril. She wouldn't want you to spend your life in self-imposed exile. The barrier within Soren finally crumbled. He enveloped Alarion in his arms, holding her as if she might vanish like morning fog. She leaned into him, her own arms encircling his waist. And for a moment, the world beyond them faded away. When they finally separated, both were stirred by the power of the moment. Soren cleared his throat, taking a step back. I ought to inspect the perimeter, ensure we weren't trailed. Alarion nodded, comprehending his need for space. As he moved towards the door, she called out to him. Soren, we're going to navigate this together. He managed to smile. Together. The day progressed calmly. Soren explored the nearby terrain, discovering no evidence of pursuit. While Alarion arranged their provisions and enhanced the cabin's comfort, they settled into a natural rhythm, like a couple who had been together for years rather than weeks. As twilight descended, storm clouds amassed over the peaks. The temperature plummeted swiftly, and the first heavy snowflakes began to descend. Uncommon for early autumn, but not unprecedented in the high country. It seems we're in for a storm, Soren remarked, securing the shutters. By nightfall, the tempest had strengthened. Wind shrieked around the cabin like a living entity, and snow fell in dense sheets. They huddled near the fire, sharing tales to pass the time. Alarion recounted her upbringing in Ohio, her father's modest congregation, her mother's enchanting singing voice. Soren found himself sharing about his early ranching days, the challenges and victories of building the Triple T from the ground up. I was overjoyed when I could finally bring Sariel out from St. Louis, he said, gazing into the flames. She was a city dweller, accustomed to society and culture, but she embraced ranch life as if she had been born to it, saying the vast, open spaces made her feel liberated. She sounds remarkable. She was. Ethoria, too, our daughter, 4 years old, with her mother's smile and my stubbornness. His voice faltered. The house echoed with an unsettling emptiness, devoid of the usual laughter. Alarion drew nearer, providing quiet solace. Outside, the storm howled, but within the warm glow of the fire, they found a semblance of tranquility. It was close to midnight when an unfamiliar sound pierced the night, a noise that didn't belong to the storm. Soren was on his feet in an instant, rifle ready. Someone was approaching. Through the fierce wind, the unmistakable sounds of horses laboring up the trail could be heard. Soren took up a position by the window while Alarion secured the shotgun he had trained her to use. "Hello, the cabin?" a voice called out. It wasn't Carillon's men, but the voice was recognizable. "Soren, it's Jorn. Let us in before we freeze to death." Relief washed over Soren as he quickly unbarred the door. Jorn entered, followed by young Torian Ravenshaw, the marshal's nephew and deputy. Both men were blanketed in snow and shaking violently from the cold. "What in the world are you doing here?" Soren asked, assisting them to the fire. "Trouble," Jorn managed to say between chattering teeth. "Big trouble. Carillon has lost his mind. After you left, he and his men attacked the ranch, burned down the east barn, scattered the Bermuda, and would have set the house ablaze too, but McAlderson and his men intervened. Mrs. Schindler is safe. They got her to town before the raid." Jorn gratefully accepted the coffee Alarion offered. "But that's not the worst of it. Go ahead, Torian." The young deputy looked grave. Carillon is accusing you of kidnapping Miss McKenderson, claiming she was forced into that release. Judge Stonecrest has issued new warrants, federal ones this time. Murder, kidnapping, cattle rustling. They're accusing you of everything. Murder. Illyrian paled. Who are we supposed to have killed? One of Carillon's men was found dead this morning, shot in the back. Carillon says it was you seeking revenge. Torian shook his head. My uncle knows it's a lie, but with federal warrants, his hands are tied. Every lawman in the territory will be after you. Soren felt the noose tightening. Carillon had outmaneuvered them perfectly, framed them for crimes and let the law handle the rest. How much time do we have? Joran didn't need to finish his thought. We could head to Colorado, Torian suggested. My uncle has contacts there who might help. No more running, Illyrian declared firmly. We need evidence against Carillon. Something that proves his true nature. The evidence is scattered across the territory in unmarked graves, Joran said bitterly. Not all of it, Illyrian's eyes sparkled with a sudden idea. Carlyle keeps records. He's too much of a businessman not to. Ledgers, contracts, correspondence. If we could get those, they'd be in his office at the Silver Dollar or at his house. That's suicide, Jake protested. The town is swarming with his men. Then we don't go to town. Illyrian looked at each man in turn. We make him come to us on our terms, our ground. The men exchanged glances. It was daring, perhaps foolish, but what other choice did they have? They were as good as dead if caught. What was your idea? Soren inquired. As the tempest howled outside, Illyrian detailed her scheme. It was perilous, hinging on Carillon's overconfidence and avarice, but it could succeed if fortune favored them. If they were clever, if they were ready to stake everything. Are you certain about this? Soren questioned once she concluded. Illyrian held his gaze firmly. My father always said that David didn't conquer Goliath through might. He triumphed with conviction and precise aim. We possess both. Torian and Joran settled by the fire while Soren and Illyrian whispered through the night, honing the plan, readying for what could be their final confrontation. Outside, the storm started to abate, stars peeking through the dispersing clouds. No matter what transpires tomorrow, Illyrian murmured, I want you to understand that these past weeks with you have been invaluable. Soren grasped her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. We're going to emerge victorious, and when we do, I want you to remain. Not because you require safeguarding, but because he hesitated, searching for the right words. Because the Triple T doesn't feel desolate when you're present. She gently pressed his hand. Then we must indeed triumph. As daybreak neared, they readied themselves for the impending confrontation. Not with weapons and brutality, but with strategy and bravery. The mountains bore witness to their resolve, timeless and unyielding, yet offering a chance for justice to those bold enough to pursue it. The charred remnants of the Triple T's eastern barn loomed like rotted teeth against the dawn sky. Soren assessed the devastation from the ridge, his jaw clenched with restrained anger. Below, riders traversed his land like scavengers. Carillon's men making themselves comfortable, while the authorities hunted for the fugitives. Around 20 men, possibly 25, Joran noted, scanning the field with binoculars. Carillon himself is in your house. It had been 3 days since they'd left the mountain cabin. 3 days of meticulous movement and preparation. Illyrian's plan demanded exact timing and unyielding resolve. Now, witnessing his home overrun, Soren doubted their approach. Are you confident in this? Torian Ravenshaw asked, inspecting his rifle for what felt like the 100th time. Not entirely, Samuel confessed. But it's too late for doubts. Alarian stepped out from the tree line, now dressed in the tattered gown she'd worn when Soren first encountered her. The change was striking. She'd smeared dirt on her face, disheveled her hair, and practiced a look of tormented captivity. It twisted Soren's gut to see her like this again. Keep in mind, she whispered, everything hinges on Carillon's greed, overpowering his prudence. He must believe I've been shattered, that I'll guide him to something precious. I insist this is too perilous, Soren argued. Allow me to accompany you. They'll shoot you on sight. But a distraught woman merging from the wilderness. She offered a grim smile. They'll be eager to learn what I know first. Joran spat out tobacco juice. Girls got grit. Soren let her execute the plan. They observed Alarian descending the hillside, her steps deliberately faltering. As she reached the midpoint to the ranch, she started shrieking, a noise that sent a chill down Soren's spine. Men rushed out of buildings, rifles raised, then lowered as they identified her through their field glasses. Soren saw Hawthorne seize Alarian roughly, shaking her as she rambled incoherently. They dragged her toward the house, and Soren's finger tensed on his rifle trigger when one man struck her across the face. Calm down, Joran whispered. She had anticipated this moment. Inside the house, Torian Carillon was seated at Soren's desk, sifting through papers with the nonchalance of a victor. He glanced up with curiosity as Alarian was brought before him, taking in her state with pleasure. Ah, the fugitive returns, he remarked, leaning back in Soren's chair. Where is Thornwatch? Alarian shrank back convincingly. Dead. The storm. The horses panicked, fell into a ravine, and I survived. How lucky. Carillon's voice was laced with doubt. I hid in a cave. Found something, she stammered, pulling out a small leather pouch from her dress. With trembling hands, she emptied its contents onto the desk. Gold nuggets, just enough to pique interest. Carillon's eyes lit up as he inspected the gold. Where did you find this? The cave. There's more? So much more. I think it's old Spanish treasure, Alarian said, her voice filled with desperation. I'll show you. But you have to promise. Promise to let me go afterward. I just want to leave. Never come back. Of course, my dear, Carillon replied, his smile cunning. Show me this cave, and all debts are forgiven. From the ridge, Soren watched the preparations below. Carlo was taking 10 men, leaving the rest to guard the ranch. Greed had overshadowed caution, just as Alarian had foreseen. The Spanish gold was a stroke of genius. Everyone knew the tales of lost conquistador treasure in these mountains. They're on the move, Torian reported, heading northeast toward Devil's Canyon. Excellent. Soren turned to Joran and the 5 Triple T hands who had joined them. You know the plan. Strike them hard and fast once they're in the canyon. Torian, you head to Hymir Ravenshaw. Inform him of our location. What about Carillon's men here? Leave them to me. Soren's smile was icy. I have unfinished business in my own home. They separated. Joran's group trailed Carillon's party while Soren and 2 men circled back toward the ranch. The remaining guards had eased up, believing the threat had passed. 3 were in the bunkhouse playing cards, 2 in the barn, and others were lazily patrolling. Soren approached his own home stealthily, using his knowledge of every board and shadow. The kitchen door opened without a sound. He had oiled those hinges himself last spring. Inside, Mrs. Kindler's kitchen stood empty, a pot still on the cold stove. Voices drifted from his study, moving cautiously. Soren peeked around the corner. Sheriff Darien sat nervously in a chair while Judge Stonecrest rummaged through Soren's private papers. Thornwatch keeps meticulous records. Stonecrest declared, "We'll uncover something to ensure the charges hold." "This isn't right, Judge," Darien objected weakly. "Soren Thornwatch is no murderer." "He's whatever I say he is," Stonecrest retorted, pulling out a stack of letters. "Well, look at this. Correspondence with railroad executives. Our upright Mr. Thornwatch seems quite keen on progress after all." Soren entered the room, his Colt pistol drawn. "Those are private, Judge." Both men froze. Darien's hand moved toward his gun, then stopped as Soren shook his head. "Soren," the sheriff breathed, "they said you were dead. Disappointed. Relieved, actually." Darien slumped in his chair. "This whole thing reeks worse than a dead skunk." "Shut up, you fool!" Stonecrest snarled. "Thornwatch, you're under arrest for murder and kidnapping." "Save it, Judge," Soren interrupted. "I know all about your deal with Carillon. 20% of his earnings for legal protection." Soren smiled at her stunned expression. "Did you really think those girls never talked?" Alarian remembered everything. Names, dates, amounts, even where you hide your payoff money. "You can't prove anything," Stonecrest stammered. "No, then you won't mind if Hymir Ravenshaw searches your office safe. The combination is your wife's birthday, isn't it?" Stonecrest went pale. Gunfire erupted outside. Joran signaled that Carillon had entered the canyon. The judge jumped at the sound, sweat beading on his forehead. "Here's what's going to happen," Soren continued. "You're going to write out a full confession. Every girl Carillon trafficked, every bribe you took, every false warrant you issued. Sheriff Darien here will witness it." "I won't," Stonecrest protested. Soren cocked his pistol. "I've lost everything that mattered to me once already. Judge, my wife, my daughter, my heart. You think I care about the law anymore?" "Right, or I'll put you in the ground and let God sort it out." Stonecrest's hands shook as he picked up the pen. The confession came slowly at first. Then, in a rush, names, places, and horrible details of Carlyle's operation spilled out. Darien looked sicker with each revelation. "Jesus Christ, Judge. Girls as young as 14. "I never touched them," Stonecrest protested. "I just facilitated business arrangements." "You sold children." Soren's voice was ice. "Keep writing." More gunfire from the canyon. Closer now. Through the window, Soren saw the remaining guards running toward the sound, leaving their posts. Everything was going according to plan. When Stonecrest finished, Soren had Darien read and sign as a witness. "Now, Sheriff, you're going to do your job for once. Arrest this man." "On what charge?" "Pick one. Corruption, trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder." "I'm sure Hymir Ravenshaw will have suggestions." Darien straightened, something like relief crossing his weathered features. "Judge Stonecrest, you're under arrest." He pulled out his seldom-used handcuffs. "Soren, what about Carillon?" A rider burst into the yard. Joran, his shirt bloody but his grin wide. "Got him bottled up in Devil's Canyon. That girl led them right into the trap. She's sharp as a tack." "Were there any casualties?" "The blacksmith took a bullet to the shoulder, but he'll pull through. Alarian is unharmed." She played her role flawlessly. As soon as the shooting began, she took cover behind some rocks. Tom has her now. A wave of relief washed over Soren. Meanwhile, Carillon was pinned down with 4 of his men behind some boulders, unsure whether to stay put or flee. Joran's grin turned feral. He was shouting about the gold, demanding to know its whereabouts. The gold originated from Sariel's jewelry, Soren explained. He had it melted down years ago. He couldn't stand the sight of it. Using it as bait seemed fitting. And on the sound of numerous horses approaching signaled Hymir Ravenshaw's arrival, with a dozen federal deputies. The marshals surveyed the scene. Stonecrest was in cuffs. Soren was armed but composed. Joran was bloodied but triumphant. Thornwatch, you've got some explaining to do. Soren handed over Stonecrest's confession. This should clear things up. Hymir, your nephew can fill in the rest. Ravenshaw scanned the document, his expression darkening with each word. Mother of God, Judge, if half of this is true, it's all true, Darian said softly. I watched him write it. There was no coercion beyond what his own conscience dictated. Where's Carillon? Devil's Canyon, Soren replied. Trapped like the cornered animal he is. The showdown occurred as the sun reached its zenith. Carillon and his remaining men were surrounded. Federal deputies were positioned on the canyon rim. The outlaw leader seemed diminished, his fine clothes torn and dusty, his face contorted with fury. Thornwatch, he bellowed. Where's my gold? Soren stood at the canyon's edge, Alarion beside him, wrapped in a blanket Torian had given her. There never was any gold, Carillon. Justice has finally caught up with you. You bastard. Carillon lunged for his gun. The shot reverberated off the canyon walls. Carillon spun and fell, his pistol slipping from his lifeless fingers. Hymir Ravenshaw lowered his rifle, smoke rising from the barrel. Torian Carillon, you're under arrest for trafficking, murder, and attempted murder of a federal officer. Ravenshaw's voice carried clearly, though I doubt you'll live to face trial. Indeed, Carillon was drawing his last breaths, blood pooling beneath him. His remaining men surrendered, dropping their weapons and raising their hands. It was finished. As they rode back to the ranch, Alarion snuggled close to Soren's side. We did it, she murmured. You did it, he corrected. That was the bravest thing I've ever witnessed. I had good reason to be brave. She looked up at him. I had something worth fighting for. The Triple T bore the marks of the battle, the burned barn, scattered cattle, the house ransacked, but it still stood, and Soren's men were already starting repairs. Mrs. Kindler greeted them in the yard, tears streaming as she hugged Alarion. Never frighten me like that again, child. That evening, as statements were given and prisoners secured, Soren found himself on the porch with Alarion. The stars were emerging peacefully after so much turmoil. What happens now? Alarion asked softly. He grasped her hand, his voice steady. We'll rebuild the ranch, our lives. That is, if you still wish to remain after everything, you couldn't chase me away. She rested her head on his shoulder. Though I might steer clear of caves for a time. Soren laughed, the sound rough but sincere. For the first time in half a decade, the future held more than just obligation. The Triple T would flourish again, and perhaps its owner's heart would too. The dust had barely settled on the edges of Cedar Ridge when the final confrontation began. Torian Carillon, injured but alive contrary to initial beliefs, had been transported to Doc Morrison's for care, heavily guarded. The streets hummed with anxious energy as residents emerged from their homes and shops, sensing that the darkness that had hung over their town might finally be lifting. Soren stood in the dusty main street, his shirt torn and blood-stained, but not his own blood. Fortunately, beside him, Hymir Ravenshaw oversaw the rounding up of Carill's remaining men. Deputies moved through the town with determination, armed with warrants and witness statements that Judge Stonecrest's confession had enabled. Thorn, Ravenshaw called out. We need to discuss the girl? Alarion stepped forward from where she'd been tending to Ironwright's shoulder wound. Despite her ordeal, she held her head high. I'm right here, Hymir. Ask your questions. Miss McKenderson, I require a comprehensive statement. Everything from the start. Ravenshaw's expression was gentle but professional. What you've endured, it's crucial evidence now. I understand. Alarion looked at Soren, finding strength in his presence. Where do we begin? They entered the courthouse. Judge Stonecrest's former stronghold now served the cause of genuine justice. As Alarion recounted her tale, her voice grew stronger with each retelling. Soren watched the court reporter's face drain of color. The young man had to pause several times, overwhelmed by the atrocities being documented. They kept us in a boarding house on Elm Street, Alarion continued. Mrs. DeLorean managed it. She posed as a kind widow, but she was the one who laced the tea with drugs when new girls arrived, making us docile for the interviews with potential employers. Can you identify this boarding house? Ravenshaw asked. The yellow one with green shutters, third from the corner. Alarion's hands tightened in her lap. Muriel Patterson tried to escape through a second-story window. They brought her back with a broken ankle, claiming she'd fallen from a horse. As Alarion spoke, Soren noticed movement outside. A crowd was gathering, mostly women, their faces etched with resolve. Mariseth Silvershade led them, the Ladies' Temperance Society banner repurposed with a new message. Justice for the lost girls. The courthouse door swung open. Sheriff Darien entered, dragging a struggling woman in black bombazine. Hymir caught this one trying to burn papers behind the boarding house, he announced. Daloran, the supposedly benevolent widow who had enticed so many young women to their demise. Her veneer of decency had completely shattered, exposing the cold-hearted scheming beneath. You possess no evidence, she hissed. The testimony of a disgraced woman against mine. We have more than just her account, Ravenshaw interjected. He presented a ledger seized from Carillon's safe. Your penmanship, I presume. Thorough logs of incoming goods and outgoing assignments. You even documented which girls were virgins, which apparently increased their value. The commotion outside intensified. Someone bellowed, "Drag her out. Let us deal with her." None of that, Soren declared, stepping onto the courthouse porch. We handle this lawfully. That's what distinguishes us from them. Mariseth Silvershade stepped forward. Soren Thornwatch, listen to me. 12 girls from our town. Daughters, sisters, friends, vanished, and we did nothing because we were terrified. You did what you could. Mariseth, you documented everything, gathered evidence. It wasn't sufficient. Tears streamed down her cheeks. But we won't stay silent any longer. If the law fails us again, it won't, Soren vowed. Not this time. Inside, Carillon had been brought in on a stretcher, his shoulder heavily bandaged, even injured and shackled. He exuded malice, his beady eyes locked onto Alarion, with lethal intent. You deceitful hag, he growled. I offered you an honest job. Honest? Alarion stood, quivering but determined. You sold Ethoria Harthorn to a mining camp brothel. She was just 15 years old. Her mother still lights a candle for her every Sunday, hoping she'll return home. Business is business, Carillon sneered. Supply and demand. The sharp click of a gun being cocked echoed loudly. Everyone turned to see Joran standing in the doorway. His old army revolver was aimed at Carillon's head. Joran, no, Soren said softly. He deserves to die. Legal or not, he does. Jorn's hand remained steady. My niece was one of those girls. Rhiannon Polson, the sweetest girl. She came from Ohio to teach school. Never made it past Laram. I remember her, Illyrian whispered. Red hair, freckles. She sang hymns to lift our spirits. Where is she? Jorn's voice cracked. Carillon laughed, a harsh sound. How should I know? I don't keep tabs on everyone. The gun roared. The bullet struck the floor mere inches from Carillon's head, sending wood splinters flying. Jorn stood frozen, tears carving paths through the dust on his face. The next shot will hit you between the eyes, Jorn stated coldly. Where is Rhiannon? Fort Laramie, Mrs. DeLorme blurted out, crumbling under the pressure. She was sent to Fort Laramie 2 months ago. The officers there pay well for educated girls. Hymir Ravenshaw cautiously approached Jorn, gently placing a hand on the gun. We'll find her, Jorn. I promise you that. But not this way. The foreman slowly lowered his weapon, his shoulders shaking. Soren grasped his old friend's shoulder, fully understanding the pain of loss. The trial preparations commenced without delay. Ravenshaw insisted on meticulousness, ensuring no room for appeals or accusations of frontier justice. As witnesses were questioned and evidence organized, a clearer picture of Carillon's operation began to take shape, a web that spanned 3 territories, entangling corrupt officials, businessmen, and military personnel. That evening, Soren encountered Illyrian standing alone amidst the charred remnants of her barn. The setting sun bathed everything in hues of gold and crimson, a stark contrast to the devastation. She murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, I can't stop thinking about them. Those girls, where they are, what they're going through. We saved ourselves, but what about them? Ravenshaw had already dispatched telegrams. Federal marshals across the territories were now investigating. Some would be found and brought home. But what of the others? Soren had no answer. They stood in silence, watching the sun dip behind the mountains. Suddenly, Illyrian declared, I need to testify. Not just provide statements, but testify in open court. Let everyone hear what happens when they turn a blind eye. It won't be easy. Carillon's lawyer will try to dismantle my reputation, make me seem complicit. I know, but someone has to speak for those who can't. Miriel, Ethoria, Rhiannon, they deserve to have their stories heard. The assault came that night. Soren was jolted awake by the shattering of glass and the pungent smell of kerosene. Fire, the ultimate weapon of frontier retribution. He grabbed his rifle and boots, rushing to the window. Shadowy figures moved around the house, torches in hand. Illyrian! He rushed into her room, finding her already awake, reaching for the shotgun he had taught her to use. How many? She asked, her voice steady. 6, maybe 8. Another window shattered downstairs. Backstairs! Move! They descended into chaos. The kitchen was already engulfed in flames, the kerosene-soaked floor ablaze. Mrs. Kindler stood in the doorway, brandishing a cast-iron skillet against a masked intruder. Soren's rifle barked, dropping the man and sending a clear message to his housekeeper and the intruders outside. They fought their way to the yard, where Soren's cowboys were already engaged. Muzzle flashes illuminated the darkness like deadly fireflies. A rider charged at Illyrian. She raised the shotgun and fired, sending him crashing from his saddle. The house, Mrs. Kindler cried. Flames were already licking at the upper windows. 5 years of memories, the last physical ties to Sariel and Ethoria, were being consumed. Soren felt a primal rage surge within him, Not the cold anger of calculation, but something far more visceral. A familiar voice cut through the chaos. Thornwatch, face me like a man. Kedrick Harthorn, Carillon's chief enforcer, stood in the flickering firelight, his scarred face contorted with hatred, a pistol in each hand. Your boss is finished, Harthorn. Give it up. He ain't my boss anymore, Harthorn spat. This is personal. You cost me everything. My job, my reputation. It's time to pay. They orbited each other as the chaos of battle unfolded around them. Soren was conscious of Valerian's gaze, of his men struggling valiantly, of his home being consumed by flames, but his focus sharpened to the man before him, the last remnant of Carillon's venom. Harthorn struck first, both pistols roaring. Soren leaped, tumbled, and rose firing. His initial shot struck Harthorn's thigh, sending him spinning. The second bullet hit him square in the chest as Harthorn collapsed. His guns discharged harmlessly into the ground. "Curse you, Thornwatch," he rasped. "Curse you to the depths." "I've already been there," Soren murmured, searching for a way out. The remaining assailants vanished into the darkness. Soren's men pursued them briefly, but were recalled to combat the blaze. Bucket lines formed. Cowboys and townsfolk, alerted by the uproar, worked in unison. It was futile. The house was entirely engulfed. A century of skill and labor turned to ash. Soren watched it burn, feeling eerily hollow. Valerian materialized at his side. Her face was streaked with soot and tears. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "This is all my fault. If I hadn't come here, none of this would have happened." "Don't," he said, pulling her close. "Don't you dare blame yourself. This was Carillon's handiwork. Every bit of it. You're home. Your memories are here." He touched his chest, then her face. "The things that truly matter can't be destroyed. Sariel taught me that. I just forgot for a while." As the first light of dawn illuminated the smoldering ruins, Hymir Ravenshaw arrived with tidings. Fort Laram had been stormed. 12 girls rescued, including Joran's niece. The telegraph wires buzzed with reports of similar rescues throughout the territories. "It's far from over," Ravenshaw cautioned. "Carlisle has influential allies. The trial will be a battle." "Then we battle," Soren stated simply. He surveyed the assembled crowd, his cowboys weary but undefeated. The townspeople, who had finally found their courage, Grace radiant even beneath the ash and exhaustion. His house was gone, but something had been erected in its place, a community united against wickedness. "We rebuild," he declared, "stronger than before. And we ensure that nothing like this ever befalls Cedar Ridge again." A cheer rose up, hesitant at first, then louder. As the sun ascended, dispelling the shadows, Soren felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 years: hope. The ultimate confrontation was yet to come in the courtroom, not the streets. But for now, they had secured a victory, not just against Carillon and his syndicate, but against the fear and silence that had enabled such malice to thrive. Valerian gripped his hand. "Together," she said softly. "Together," he agreed, meaning it with every part of his being. The morning sun bathed the Wyoming plains in hues of gold and amber, softening the rugged landscape. 6 months had elapsed since the fire, since the trials that had rocked Cedar Ridge to its core, where the old ranch house had once stood. A new edifice was taking shape, perhaps smaller, but constructed with hope rather than mere ambition. Soren held his coffee, observing his crew as they worked on the roof's framework. The clanging of hammers and the whirring of saws had turned into a familiar melody, a beat of restoration that seemed to resonate throughout the valley. Joran oversaw the building process with his characteristic diligence, with his niece Rhiannon by his side, learning the ropes of bookkeeping. The young woman had come back from Fort Laramie transformed, yet unbroken, discovering her calling in aiding other survivors in rebuilding their lives. "You'll wear out that porch plank if you keep on with that pacing," Illyrian remarked, stepping out from the temporary lodgings they had set up in the old foreman's cabin. She glowed in the morning sunlight, her dark hair neatly pinned up, dressed in a simple blue gown that Kindler had crafted for her. The tormented expression had vanished from her eyes, replaced by a serenity that Soren valued more than any of his lost belongings. "Just lost in thought," he responded, putting down his cup to take her hand, reflecting on how different this all is. "The first time I constructed a home here, it was to make a statement to the world, to myself. This time," he motioned towards the ongoing work, "this time, it's about forging something new, not attempting to resurrect what was lost." Illyrian gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "Sariel would be proud of what you've accomplished, what we've all achieved." The ordeals had been as challenging as Hymir Ravenshaw had foretold, and even more so. Carillon, recovered from his injury, had hired the finest lawyers that territorial funds could procure. They had assailed Illyrian's reputation, insinuating she had been a willing participant who had changed her mind, suggesting she had enticed Soren for protection. But Illyrian had remained steadfast, her testimony clear and incriminating. Other women had found the bravery to speak out as well. Rhiannon, Ithoria Harthorn, who had been rescued from the mining camps, and others who had escaped or been freed. Their united voices had formed a chorus that no amount of legal tactics could suppress. Torian Carillon had been sentenced to hang Mrs. Daloran received 20 years of hard labor. Judge Stonecrest, stripped of his title, would spend his remaining years in federal prison. The network they had established had collapsed, its members either dispersed or imprisoned. "The new barn is shaping up nicely," Illyrian noted, shielding her eyes to gaze across the yard. Hrothgar McKelderson mentioned his horses should arrive next week. Soren nodded in agreement. The neighboring rancher had become a steadfast ally, and their plan to crossbreed horses would benefit both properties. The Triple T was now smaller. Soren had sold some land to cover legal fees and rebuilding costs, but it was sufficient. More than sufficient. "Mrs. Kindler is curious about the kitchen plans," Illyrian continued. "She's insisting on a more spacious pantry this time. Whatever she desires, she's earned it." Soren hesitated, mustering the courage to express what he had been contemplating. "Illyrian, I've been pondering the future." She turned to face him completely, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "Have you, indeed? The ranch is on the mend." The ranch was thriving once more. However, managing a place like this alone was becoming too much. He paused, gathering his thoughts. "What I'm attempting to convey is that I no longer wish to face this journey solo. Soren Thornwatch, are you by chance proposing to me while adorned with sawdust and coffee stains?" He glanced down at his disheveled appearance and chuckled, a sound that came more naturally to him now than it had in years. "Indeed, I suppose I am, although I had envisioned a more romantic setting. Romance isn't necessary." Illyrian moved closer, her hands gently resting on his chest. "I crave authenticity. I desire the man who braved peril for a stranger, who defied evil when it would have been simpler to avert his gaze, who demonstrated to me that shattered hearts can mend. Is that an affirmation?" It certainly is. He leaned in and kissed her, right there on the unfinished porch, amidst the clamor of construction, and Joran's enthusiastic wolf whistle piercing the morning air. It wasn't the proposal he had envisioned, but it was flawlessly imperfect, much like life itself. The nuptials occurred 3 weeks later in the meadow behind the ranch, surrounded by blooming wildflowers and the majestic mountains as witnesses. Reverend Patterson, Muriel's father, who had journeyed west upon learning of his daughter's fate, officiated the ceremony. The elderly man had discovered solace in aiding the rescued girls, helping them heal both physically and spiritually. Mariseth Silvershade acted as the matron of honor. The Ladies' Temperance Society, having evolved into the Territorial Women's Protection Association, had successfully advocated for new anti-trafficking laws and established safe houses in 3 cities. Sheriff Darien, re-elected following his pivotal role in dismantling Carillon's operation, stood beside Soren as the best man. The lawman had found his resolve during the trials, becoming the protector that Cedar Ridge had always required. "Do you, Soren Thornwatch, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Patterson inquired, his voice resonating across the assembled crowd. "I do," Soren affirmed, his gaze never wavering from Ilarian's face. "And do you, Ilarian McKenderson, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she murmured. Then with more conviction, "I do. By the authority vested in me by Alderaan in the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife." The festivities carried on well into the night. Cowboys danced with the rescued girls who had chosen to remain and build new lives in Cedar Ridge. Joran twirled his niece around the makeshift dance floor, both of them laughing through tears. Mrs. Schindler oversaw a feast that seemed to cater to half the territory, her face lighting up with pride whenever someone complimented her culinary skills. As the evening drew to a close, Soren found himself standing with Ilarian at the outskirts of the gathering, observing their friends and neighbors celebrate not just a wedding, but a community reborn. "Any regrets?" he inquired softly. "Not a single one," Ilarian replied. "I ventured west in search of a fresh start. Instead, I discovered something far more precious, a purpose, a home, a love I never anticipated. Even amidst all the peril, the pain, especially because of it." She nestled closer into his embrace. "We both came to understand that evading life's challenges isn't truly living. Sariel and Athoria and all those girls who were lost, they deserved for us to embrace life fully, to treasure what they could no longer experience." A refreshing breeze descended from the mountains, bearing the aroma of pine and the promise of new beginnings. The next day would bring its own set of trials. Managing a ranch always did. There would be harsh winters and parched summers, market ups and downs, and the constant battle against nature's whims. But on this night, beneath a sky full of stars that seemed to touch the very edges of the world, Soren Thornwatch held his new bride and felt a sense of wholeness that had eluded him for years. The Triple T Ranch had been restored, not just in its physical structure, but in spirit, where solitude had once held sway. Now love resided where silence had once echoed. Joy filled the air. "I love you, Mrs. Thornwatch," he whispered into her hair. "And I love you, Mr. Thornwatch," she responded. As if blessing their union, a meteor blazed across the sky. Some might dismiss it as mere chance, but Soren chose to see it as a sign of approval from those who had come before, Sariel and Athoria, Muriel Patterson, and all the others. Their sacrifices had not been made in vain. From despair had emerged victory. From the ruins had risen hope. The music continued to play. Fiddle and guitar blended melodies that floated across the plains. Cowboys sang old tunes of love and sorrow. Their voices were rough but heartfelt. Amidst it all, Soren and Ilarion danced, two hearts who had found each other through the fires of adversity. The Triple T Ranch stood prepared for whatever lay ahead. No longer a symbol of loss, but a testament to the strength of redemption. In the Wyoming territory, where justice had once been bought and sold, and innocence was a commodity, a new era had begun. Some tales conclude with a ride into the sunset, but this one ended with the dawn, not a conclusion, but a commencement. As the first light of day kissed the mountains, Soren and Ilarion stood together on their new porch, watching the world come to life. "What's on your mind?" Ilarion inquired. "That I can finally breathe again," Soren answered, a sentiment he hadn't felt in years. "I can breathe," she smiled, recalling her own desperate words in that abandoned shack so many months prior. They had both been gasping for air in their respective prisons. His was one of grief, hers of captivity. Together they had found freedom. The ranch began to stir around them. Roosters announced the day, horses whinnied, cowboys emerged from their bunkhouses, seeking coffee and breakfast. It was an ordinary morning in the best possible way, brimming with potential and purpose. "Ready for the day?" Ilarion asked. "Ready for the rest of our lives," Soren clarified, and he meant every word. Side by side, they stepped toward their future, leaving prints in the dust that the wind would soon erase. But what they had built together, love, justice, hope, would endure long after they were gone. A legacy not etched in sand, but in the hearts of all those they had saved and inspired. The Wild West had tried to shatter them. Instead, it had shaped them into something more resilient. And within that metamorphosis lay the genuine treasure. Not riches concealed in caverns or fortune gauged by livestock and land, but the priceless wealth of the human spirit's victory. The conclusion had birthed a new start, and that inception held the promise of beauty. My mother had always told me that the blacksmith was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He had taken two broken pieces of metal and transformed them into something stronger. And in that transformation, he had created a symbol of hope and resilience. The end had become a beginning, and the beginning promised to be beautiful. If this story touched you, give it a like and tell us in the comments. What would you have done if you were in their shoes? Subscribe to Frontier Stories and join us as we continue to tell stories of hope, resilience, and the beautiful, messy truth of Wild West.